Things remain active for the Miami Heat as they continue to look for a way to acquire either Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, with new reporting from various sources indicating that the asking price for either star is changing. Is it time to wonder if the Heat suddenly have the upper hand to land their whale? We'll break it all down on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
Are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat, however you may be listening on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. It's been a few days since we were able to get a chance to record an episode together. Wes has been holding down the fort in the meantime, but we're back. We're exhausted from a trip to Vegas. We've got a lot of information that we'll get to in an upcoming episode from our trip there. But for now, the news regarding the Miami Heat is all about their acquisition or the possible acquisition of either Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, with information changing regarding what those players, whether or not they might be more available than they were just a couple of days ago, what the asking price for each of those players is. And then we asked a question about whether or not Miami might suddenly have the upper hand, because I think the things that have changed certainly favor Miami. So we'll get to that later on. But we'll start off with Kevin Durant. With the news surrounding KD, that perhaps the asking price for KD is lower than it once was, and Miami's Barry Jackson reporting that talks remain very hot and heavy for KD. That obviously Durant is still Miami's priority. He is their favorite target out of either Durant or Mitchell. That doesn't really play out differently than what we expected. Like, KD just seems more typically to be in Pat Riley's wheelhouse as far as an older superstar, a better superstar, quite frankly, and also one that's much more likely to help guarantee a championship sooner rather than later. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is exactly what we had been hearing in Las Vegas, talking with some people early on before these reports came out, before we even saw photos of Andy Ellisberg and Sean Marks having breakfast at a Las Vegas hotel. I've been hearing that the Heat still believe that they have a chance to get Kevin Durant. And people were asking me, people would come up and be like, hey, do you think the Heat can get Kevin Durant? And I said, I don't know if they can get Kevin Durant, but they think they can get Kevin Durant. And this is not a delusional front office, right? This is a front office that is very practical. And if they think they have a chance at KD, then they probably do. And so, look, it sounds like the Nets are still asking for a haul for Kevin Durant, but that they're at least having a conversation with Miami, which again leads us to believe that the Nets think that there is something to be done potentially with the Heat. I don't know what that includes. It probably starts with Tyler Herro and like a Duncan Robinson contract and some first-round picks, and then maybe builds from there. Maybe it includes other teams. If Ben Simmons is maybe involved going to another location, or Bam Adebayo is involved in that deal, and all these things. But obviously, there is some road here potentially for a deal to get done, because if there weren't, I wouldn't have been hearing the stuff that I heard, and Andy Ellisberg and Sean Marks are probably not having eggs at the Win or wherever it was that they were. They're like, there's something here. I just don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think there's enough smoke there where it seems pretty likely. It's just because, one, all the scuttle, all the rumors and everything else, and again, even actual reporting on this, and of course, people keep asking as well about the availability of certain players and whether or not Miami, again, like you said, has an opportunity, if they realistically think they have an opportunity. Miami doesn't put things out. They don't use the media machine as often as other franchises do to stir things in their favor. It's not like they're leaking out information, put it out there just for the sake of seeing what rises to the top or anything like that. So my feeling is that if there's this much buzz about this possibility, it's because there's a very real chance that Miami still believes that they're very much in the hunt for this. And we'll talk a little bit later on about why the odds might be higher in Miami's favor. But I think the big question that a lot of Heat fans is what's worth trading in order to acquire Kevin Durant? Like, we've made this case before. At 34, yes, he's older, an injury history to some degree. Of course, the Achilles that now he seems fully recovered from. He's had a long season, because he played in the Olympics last year. He had a playoff run the year before that. Not such a deep playoff run this year, but either way, it's taking its toll on his older body. Can he still be the functional player, the superstar level player that he has been throughout his whole career? I think if Miami's interested in making this acquisition, similar to what they did when they acquired Shaquille O'Neal in 2004, is to say, yes, we want to get this player, this version of KD. That's good enough. Even if it's just for the next couple seasons, 3-4 seasons, however long, this is fine. This is the player that we want. If for some reason he breaks down or he can't be the player that we expect him to be, then we'll make a move later on. But for now, he is the player that we're targeting. Do you sacrifice your younger talent? Not Tyler Herro necessarily, because I think that's your best, most movable asset, but Bam Adebayo. And that's the bigger question, because I think a lot of people are asking is whether or not they move Bam. Even I was at an elevator talking to some Locked On fans, and they recognized my book bag, and they said, we're big fans of the Locked On show. And it's like, do you think Bam's gone, right? And I'm like, whoa, where are you hearing this? I don't think Miami has any intention of moving Bam, but I guess the general consensus is that Miami's best young player is Bam Adebayo, and that's what you'd have to trade in order to acquire Kevin Durant. I'm not so sure I agree. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I have no idea what it's going to take, but we also have Barry Jackson reporting that that Bam has not sought any assurances from the Heat's organization about whether or not he would be included in a Durant deal. We also have Barry reporting that Heat players have been in Kevin Durant's ear ever since all this stuff went down. And you have to imagine that those players are probably maybe Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, but certainly Bam Adebayo, who he and Kevin Durant have a pretty decent relationship, having played on Team USA together. And Kevin Durant saying publicly that he admires Bam Adebayo, and he was most impressed of Bam than any of his Team USA teammates. And so you would imagine that maybe Bam is not seeking those assurances from the organization because he believes that if Durant is going to come to Miami, that he would be a part of that. Because the other part of this, too, is not just getting Kevin Durant for the sake of getting Kevin Durant. It's getting Kevin Durant to win a championship. You said something earlier, and I thought it was a really good point. Look, we can debate the Donovan Mitchell or the Kevin Durant thing. I think that's a fair debate to have. If you're a Heat fan, which one would you rather have? Not even including the price it would take to get one of those players. But the one thing about Kevin Durant that Donovan Mitchell cannot offer you right now for sure is a chance to win, is the opportunity to be the favorites in the Eastern Conference. If you, depending on what you have to give up, if you add Kevin Durant to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, I don't really care what the rest of the roster looks like. That team's the favorite in the East to me. And look, Donovan Mitchell with those two guys.
Let me add something to that. Let me add something to that real quickly, because it's just, now a year later, everybody's kind of rewriting history to some degree and saying, oh, that Brooklyn experiment was never going to work. That's ridiculous. Last offseason, everybody said, oh, they're going to get Harden. They got Kyrie Irving. They're going to be healthy. They just went on this deep run where they were a toe over the chance of being able to eliminate the Milwaukee Bucks and probably win a title last year. I don't think anybody doubted that they'd be able to go on another title run this year. It just, things imploded with Kyrie.
99 times out of 100, it works out better than what happened in Brooklyn this last year. I mean, that was crazy. That was the absolute worst case scenario. I'm with you. KD is that good right now. I love Donovan Mitchell, man. You know that. We've talked about Donovan Mitchell since before he was drafted, okay? We love Donovan Mitchell. He is not as good as Kevin Durant, and there's no guarantee he will ever be as good as Kevin Durant. And that's not a knock on Donovan Mitchell. Kevin Durant is one of the best 15 players of all time. That's what we're talking. And he's coming off of a season when he basically just scored 30 points a game. Like, this isn't a guy that's showing any signs of slowing down despite the injury history. And so if you had your pick, you would obviously go Kevin Durant. Now, the question is, do you have to include Bam Adebayo? And I know, like, part of me wonders if we're overthinking this. The Heat went 17-9 without Bam last season. Dedmon, you have him back. Yurtseven, he played just fine. If you think about the conference finals last year and you were basically just swap Bam Adebayo for Kevin Durant, don't you kind of feel like Miami beats Boston? Maybe. I don't know. It's a tough call. I just wonder. Ultimately, I come down to I still don't think that team is good enough to get back to the finals. If you lose Bam Adebayo and if you basically just swap Bam for Kevin Durant, I don't know that team is better than Milwaukee or Boston. I just don't. And I think that's probably where Miami puts the hard stop is on Bam. Everything else is on the table except for Bam and Jimmy Butler, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I agree that if you take away Bam, and again, with you having lost PJ Tucker, who was a significant contributor, at least offensively, and now all of a sudden you're taking the heart and soul of this team's defense, somebody who allows, look, Jimmy is a fantastic defender. Kyle, again, a fantastic defender. There's only so much they can do when they don't cover nearly as much ground as Bam Adebayo. I mean,
Right.
we can go on record as saying that nobody in the NBA covers as much ground as Bam Adebayo. That's just the unique player that he is. And you take him out of that, out of the equation, and all of a sudden Miami's defense is a lot more porous, and there's no way of replacing what he does. And so I
And I know
agree.
that there are people saying like, "Hey, why are we even talking about Bam? Because he can't be on the same team as Ben Simmons because of the rookie designated contract." This obviously caveat: Ben Simmons goes to a third team.
Yes.
So that just worth noting that here.
Yeah. But I think there is still increased possibilities of Miami being able to land KD, not just because they're most interested, but something that we'll talk about a little bit later as to why the odds are improving for Miami. But before we do that, just a reminder that this episode is brought to you by rockauto.com. Look, we've talked about them for months now. You have to go into a store, right, to get a new part for your car or truck. You start asking questions behind the counter, starts asking you questions. You feel uncomfortable, awkward. Maybe you're not answering them the way they want you to. And then all of a sudden, it's a less than desirable experience. Why go through all that when the parts they happen to carry in their warehouse are the same ones that you have access to on your phone or on your computer? You've got access to rockauto.com, a family owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for 20 plus years. You can go there, use their website. It's so easy to navigate. Just a few clicks and you get exactly what you're looking for. You get it delivered directly and safely to your door, and you save time and you save money. And who doesn't need that in today's world? I know I certainly could, and I've used them before, got parts for my wife's car. It was a cinch to do, and I saved hundreds of dollars. So go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, then write the phrase locked on in the how did you hear about us section so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. That's rockauto.com. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. We'll be continuing to provide great coverage throughout all of Miami's offseason, especially if they're able to acquire one of the superstars that they might be linked to. Right now, we talked about Kevin Durant, but let's shift gears a little bit here as we talk about another superstar out of Utah, Donovan Mitchell. First and foremost, what do you think about that tweet that's been going around with the video footage of Dwayne Wade signing autographs and being asked if he's going to send Donovan to Miami? You buy it? You think he was distracted, or was he going on the record as tampering and ruining his own chances?
That was blowing off a fan that he rather have said something a little bit more maybe mean to. That's how I read it. The guy was like, "You gonna bring Donovan Mitchell to Miami?" He goes, "Yeah." Like that was the most sarcastic "yeah" I've ever heard in my life. He wanted nothing to do with it, but also hilarious.
Yeah, I know. And of course, Bleacher Report never change. Bleacher Report, keep aggregating. They took that tweet, they've run it out and sent it out to their millions of followers, and everybody's like, "Oh, what is Dwayne Wade doing? Like, he's part owner of the Utah Jazz. How could he just be on the record and saying he's going to trade away their star
I
player?"
just want to say something about Dwayne Wade's involvement in this. I have no sense at all that Dwayne Wade has any input on basketball operations.
It's impossible.
He is a minority stake owner. He does not have a controlling interest in the team. He is an owner to be an owner. He is an owner in order to just get into that club of the NBA. Not dissing him for it, but it's purely a business decision. I do not think that Dwayne Wade is sitting there on the phone with Pat Riley negotiating deals. It was not
Definitely
Dwayne
not.
Wade's decision to trade away Royce O'Neal for a first-round pick. It was not Dwayne Wade's input to get any amount of draft picks for Rudy Gobert. This is not, especially with somebody like Danny Ainge in charge of basketball operations. That's not somebody who typically seeks input from a minority owner of the basketball team he works for. So
I will say this on along those same lines. I am also sure that he's providing some mentorship advice to Donovan Mitchell.
And that is
the
different.
brotherhood of the NBA is just too strong.
Yes.
And he'll go to D Wade and be like, "What would you do in this situation?" And Dwayne will say what what should say is like, "Look, man, I was in Miami from 2008 to 2010, putting up big numbers, playing alongside Jamario Moon, Jermaine O'Neal, etc., wasting 2 good years of my career, my prime. And
Right.
then we got the big three together, etc. But if I want to compete for a championship, I want to go to a better team. Does that sway Donovan in Miami's favor or push for a trade? I'd
Maybe
say
Donovan Mitchell does ask for a trade in seeking some sort of mentorship from Dwayne Wade, but I think it would be Donovan Mitchell initiating that conversation. Dwayne Wade's not
of
going to knock on
course,
Donovan Mitchell's door or call
of
him up
course,
on his phone and just be like, "Hey,
right.
man, what are you doing here?" Like, let's remember that Dwayne Wade
Yeah.
owns part of the Utah
Yeah, he doesn't want
Jazz.
to lose
He wants
money
to
in
make
this
some money
acquisition.
back on this thing, right?
Right.
So, it's kind of funny. Anyway, the Donovan Mitchell stuff is really interesting because now, obviously, Adrian Wojnarowski reporting that that the Jazz are now listening to offers, that they're
Right.
opening the phone lines essentially. And that's just,
Yeah, here's
look,
the exact
we're
quote.
basically just going down the path of semantics here.
Right.
Everybody and their mother knew that Donovan Mitchell is not long for Utah. We knew this before they traded Rudy Gobert. We knew this before Utah's season was over, that Donovan Mitchell is
Mhm.
not finishing his career in the Jazz. It's a matter of when, not if, Mitchell leaves Utah. And we could, figure out if because he demands a trade or if Danny Ainge just wants to push the big red button and blow the whole thing up, whatever. But it's happening. The writing's on the wall. So we can kind of have these like reports about now they're listening to calls, now they're not. Now they kind of want this, now they kind of want that. At the end of the road here is the Jazz trading Donovan Mitchell somehow for something. And so Andy Larson from the Salt Lake Tribune, who does a really great job there, reporting that Miami's already called Utah and offered them something, but the Jazz just weren't super impressed with that offer. I would have to imagine that Miami did not put the kitchen sink offer on the table for them at first blush. So I wonder how much further down the road that they can get. But the Donovan Mitchell stuff, it's starting to churn a little bit.
Okay, here's a question that I'm thinking even as we're talking about this. We debated Bam Adebayo's trade value for Kevin Durant. If somehow, and I think they still can from a logistic perspective, if they trade Walker Kessler and Donovan Mitchell together and you throw Bam and Adebayo into that package for Donovan, is that worth it then? Is that a trade that Miami seems
No,
less
I
or
know
more
you think
likely
I
to do?
love Walker Kessler. I don't like Walker Kessler that much that he can replace Bam on defense.
Well, I'm
Especially
saying
because it's
it
one
could be
I
a
would
different
trade.
version of this team.
It's worth considering Bam for KD just because it's KD and because Kevin
Mhm.
Durant is a really awesome defender in the playoffs when he wants to be, right? In the regular season, he can't quite be that guy anymore, but in the
Yeah.
playoffs, he can turn it up. I haven't seen that from Donovan Mitchell. There's obviously a ceiling there defensively that he can reach that he hasn't gotten close to, but these last couple of years in Utah, it's been bad defensively, straight up. And so if you're putting him at the point of attack and no Bam Adebayo behind him, and you're just like, all right, Walker Kessler, you do your best. No, defensively, Donovan Mitchell is not what Kevin Durant is offensively, and he certainly isn't even close defensively. No, I would not include Bam in a Donovan Mitchell trade. That is a hard stop. I think if push comes to shove, the Heat would have to at least have a long meeting about including Bam in a KD deal.
Yeah.
But there's no meeting here for Donovan Mitchell. You do not include Bam.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think there are certain, like, I mean, that's the whole thing. From Heat fans, and I'm trying to think of it from this perspective. It's like, you see his blemishes much more closely than what perhaps his strengths, and that's unfortunate because in the playoff run they just had, yes, he wasn't. I wouldn't go so far as to say struggling offensively, but he wasn't producing the way a lot of Heat fans would like. And given that, then they're much more open to the idea of trading him for another star player. But you can't disregard everything else he does as the playmaker, as the hub of this team's offense and defense. And that's the thing, is that he's a playmaking five, and that's so rare in today's game with switchable players and multi-tool players and things of that
Right.
sort. Bam is still, if not a unicorn, still a very much of an aberration, and you need that player on your team in order to remain competitive. And he's also your face of your future. You've gone on record.
Yes.
Pat Riley has gone on record talking about him being the cornerstone of this team. He's your young all-star. He's your defensive player of the year candidate. He's the guy that gets along with everybody. He's just been part of the Olympic process. And all those players, old heads like Draymond and KD and everybody saying, I really like Bam and his game and everything else like that. That is such
He's
a
the guy,
sign.
exactly what you're saying. He is the guy superstars want to play with. And so whether it's Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, you need Bam to kind of make it all click into place. And yeah, he's not the number one option on offense. He's probably never going to be, all right? But this is a perennial All-NBA type of talent and a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate. This is what we're talking about. Those guys are really valuable. And so when we shift back to the Donovan Mitchell trade, you could discuss the Bam thing if you want, if you're a Heat fan. I'm looking at this more from the front office point of view. Why would I include Bam? Go out. If I'm Miami's front office, and Utah comes to me and Utah's like, we want Bam. We'll be like, all right, cool. Go find a player as close as Bam, as close as possible to Bam on the trade market, and then come back to us. If you can find anything better than Tyler Herro, but worse than Bam Adebayo. All right. And I have a really hard time seeing the Jazz finding any kind of player comparable to Bam on the open market. It's probably going to be more on the Tyler Herro kind of deal. This is why the Knicks are involved.
Yeah.
We've heard them as a possible Donovan Mitchell landing spot. Now we can question whether or not the Knicks should trade for Donovan Mitchell or not. I don't know. All I know is that their best offer beats Miami's best offer because they have 11 future first-round picks that they can put together between 2023 and 2029. Miami at best would have 4, and that requires unlocking protections on one of those picks. And then they have R.J. Barrett, who Jake Fisher from Bleacher Report basically pulled 24 NBA executives, and all of them agreed basically, or a majority did, that RJ Barrett has more value in a trade than Tyler Herro does. And that's not something I could necessarily disagree with. RJ Barrett was a top 3 pick. Tyler Herro was not in the same draft. And so I have no problem with that. But would the Knicks include RJ Barrett? I don't know, because the next best asset on their list from a player perspective is Obi Toppin. And I think Tyler Herro is a much better asset than Obi Toppin. I don't even think that's even a question. So if Miami's best offer is Tyler Herro and 4 first-round picks versus the Knicks' best offer of Obi Toppin and like 5 or 6 first-round picks or some swaps or whatever it is, those deals are really close. And if I'm Utah, I would take the getting Tyler Herro and some picks versus Obi Toppin and some picks. And nothing against Obi Toppin, but he's not a centerpiece of a deal.
Yeah.
Where Tyler Herro, you can sort of argue yourself into that.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Just as I made the same case or argument about Bam, like Tyler's a really good player too. So it's like he is a strong candidate. I know there's limitations there, but at the same time, I think he's also a strong centerpiece for any potential trade deal. But now it seems kind of like these two teams are trading off of each other, and that kind of favors Miami, something we'll talk about in the next segment, because I think their odds have certainly improved. But before we do that, just a reminder that this episode is brought to you by your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info, betonline.net. Listen, I was just in Las Vegas, and I'm going to tell you, betting is such a strong and active part of that city and a part of your culture. And if you want to go, newsflash. But if you want to be able to capitalize it and make some money, and I know a lot of people do, especially nowadays, increase gas prices or whatever, you want to be able to make a little extra pocket change. BetOnline.net is your best place to go to. All your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, scores, podcast, news, the latest odds on Kevin Durant's chances of landing in Miami, etc. It's the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Thanks for sticking with us throughout the offseason, because there's so much going on, from Las Vegas to potential trades for superstars and everything else. And we'll be here providing you daily content just as we always do. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts to get all the best coverage possible. Now that we're talking about Donovan Mitchell and Kevin Durant, I know a lot of people are interested in hearing, where Miami seems likely to land. But I think moreover, now all of a sudden with these kind of increased, the things that have changed or shifted over the last couple of days, either Brooklyn or Utah, my feeling is that it might skew in Miami's favor. And we get this question from, is this name right, Wes? Big Joe Grizzly? Did we get a question from Big Joe Grizzly?
Well, yeah, the Twitter name is right. I don't think that's his actual right name, but yeah.
Oh, well, that's no fair. I want to read this question if that's actually his given name. But anyway, Big Joe writes in, with the recent news of Donovan Mitchell being available, does this, in your mind, offer the Heat leverage in negotiations with Brooklyn on a KD trade? And I have to say, Big Joe, I think you're right on the money. Wes, you and I will debate this now. But I even, before I saw this question from Big Joe, just yesterday, kind of reading the tea leaves and everything else, and you're hearing about that the trade demands from Brooklyn have been lowered or will be lowered because they're too unrealistic. Nobody's going to be able to throw the kind of package that Minnesota, if not stupidly, at least, I don't know, confusingly offered to Utah in exchange for Rudy Gobert. They're not going to get that kind of deal. And while KD is still by far the better player over Gobert, and I don't think anybody's arguing that, I just don't think they're going to be able to get Karl Anthony Towns plus this plus that and 8 picks the way that people have been reporting. I think those reports might have been slightly exaggerated. It just seems like the asking price for KD has to be lowered because nobody's going to be able to offer it. And yes, Brooklyn could go into the season with KD and Kyrie Irving on their roster, but I think they're loath to do that. I think they want to just kind of blow it up.
Yeah.
I think they want to be able to move forward. The experiment didn't work. There's bad blood between everybody in exchange right now, and I just don't think they did want to necessarily keep that rolling into next season. You want to be able to go into the next season with a clean-ish slate, if nothing else. Yes, there are questions about Steve Nash and everything else. In the front office, certainly there are legitimate questions about whether or not they can remain functional, but you at least want to have an idea of what your roster is going to be like. And even in promotional materials that they're sending out for season tickets, KD's not on there, Kyrie's not on there. So it seems like they're ready to move on from a marketing perspective, and that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. Now, as far as the Donovan Mitchell is concerned, now all of a sudden,
can I stop you on the Brooklyn thing?
yes,
I do agree with you on everything. It doesn't sound, and there's been some stuff out there about, hey, maybe you just wait it out and hope that Durant changes his mind. Maybe, but Kyrie is gone. Okay, all the reporting. I mean, we got Vince Goodwill from Yahoo basically saying that rather than go into the season with Kyrie Irving, they'd rather just wave and stretch him.
oof,
And if it comes to
wow,
that over trying to get something for Russell Westbrook
talk
plus
about a
the
clean
picks.
slate, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Tsai, the owner of Brooklyn, has no interest in bringing Kyrie Irving back, according to Vince Goodwill. And so, if that's the case, all right, cool. Kyrie's gone for something or for nothing, and now it's just Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and Royce O'Neal. Cool. That's not winning you a championship as good as Kevin Durant is, and as good as Ben Simmons might end up being if he gets back onto a basketball court. But I could see this playing out to the point where we get into the regular season, sort of like what the James Harden deal was before he got moved to Brooklyn. But I just can't imagine Kevin Durant being on, like, just changing his mind after requesting publicly a trade.
Right.
And I can't see Brooklyn just being, like, to your point, waiting this out until past the trade deadline. I have a hard time seeing it. Who knows? It's the NBA. It's crazy. Anything can happen. But I'm with you on that. And then you were saying something about Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, I think the flip side of this now is that, while the asking price for KD had been reportedly high, now all of a sudden with the reporting from Adrian Wojnarowski that Utah is much more open to trading Donovan Mitchell than they were, say, a week ago, that they're clearly looking to move on from him and blowing things up in Utah, just as many people thought they would. Right. Now, all of a sudden, Miami has strengthened their footing to a considerable degree because as Big Joe points out, now if you're interested in Donovan Mitchell and you are the strongest suitor, I think, for Donovan in Utah, and you're also the strongest suitor or one of the strongest suitors for KD's talents in Brooklyn. Now, if you acquire Donovan Mitchell, and it seems like now Mitchell will be moved, like I said, then all of a sudden the chances of trading Durant seem a lot less likely. One of your strongest chess pieces or suitors is off the board because we're hearing that DeAndre Ayton is close to signing with the Indiana Pacers, perhaps. And it seems likely to happen over the next couple of days to some degree, right. Even some reporting indicating that it might happen just a day or two ago. It just hasn't happened yet. Now, Toronto unwilling to trade Scotty Barnes in any exchange for Kevin Durant. And all of a sudden, Toronto no longer the strong suitor they was. And if Phoenix is not as good as a suitor for KD and Toronto is no longer as good a suitor, then all of a sudden Miami's chances are much greater. So you kind of have much more leverage, I think, than you once did in the exchange. And you can tell Utah is like, look, I don't have to offer you anything because I'm all in on Kevin Durant. And from the other perspective, you can tell Brooklyn, listen, we're no longer interested in KD because we're this close to landing Donovan Mitchell anyway. And then all of a sudden, both teams are kind of playing off of each other, and Miami winds up coming off on top.
That's Pat Riley's plan, isn't it? It's got to be. Look, and you mentioned some of the odds there, and it's worth actually being pretty specific here. And this is via BetOnline. The Las Vegas odds they used to have Phoenix all the way at the top in terms of title chances right before Kevin Durant demanded his trade. They've come down a little bit. Now they're still the Phoenix Suns, and they're still really good, so they're still among the top 6 teams in terms of finals chances. But the odds have come down. Toronto's odds were rising up the ladder there until this past week, these last couple of days. They've actually dropped. So to your point, these reports that they're not willing to include Scotty Barnes, maybe they're not even willing to include Pascal Siakam. Maybe they're just saying, you know what, we like what we've got going here. We're just going to stand pat and just sort of let this thing play out. Maybe they have some sort of intel on Kevin Durant that Durant would not be happy in Toronto, because that's another part of this too. So there's that. New Orleans' odds, even though people have bandied about their opportunity to maybe trade for Kevin Durant, they haven't moved. They're still like low on the board there. And so Miami's odds this entire time have remained stable. They've been in the top 6 or 7 according to most sports books this entire time. And if you look at this Heat team as currently constructed, they have no business being in the top 6 or 7 in title odds. I'm sorry, like they just don't. Okay,
Right.
What that tells me is that Vegas is stabilizing their odds there because they believe that they're going to get one of Durant or Donovan Mitchell. I'm glad you were optimistic about this, and you were thinking about this the same way Big Joe Grizzly was thinking about this. My initial thought was, is Miami going to kind of screw the pooch on this one because they're trying to play both sides here a little bit? And what if they miss out on both of them because they can't really decide which direction that they want to go in? What if Donovan Mitchell just goes to Brooklyn for Kevin Durant or something or whatever? I don't know, but like I worry a little bit about that. That was my first response, but the more you and I have talked about it and everything you're just saying, this front office has been so diligent and so smart and so subtle with the way that they're able to maneuver these kinds of things that I think your initial reaction was more correct than mine. And I think ultimately for the Heat to get the guy that they want, whether it's Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, without including Bam Adebayo, which has been sort of the underlying theme of this entire episode, it probably will require playing them off of each other and being like, look, it's either this or nothing. And so I do think that if the Heat are going to get their way, it probably looks a lot like what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of looking at things too. Look, I know there's always some, if not homerish necessarily, Miami-centric perspective because we report on the team, we've been covering them for a long time, so there's always the thought process that they operate more effectively than other teams do. But if you had to look at New York's front office over the last few years, and I know this is a very different one than it has been in the past, but you look at Miami versus Utah versus New York and versus Brooklyn, certainly, I think that Miami is certainly such a strong team in terms of their connections, their relationships, and everything else like that. I think that they're the much more trustworthy trade partner moving forward. So if you want to engage with any team, if you're looking to move Donovan Mitchell or if you're looking to move Kevin Durant, I think Miami is certainly the team that you'd want to engage with. And there's that personal relationship, not just between Ellisberg and Marks, but also between Sean Marks and his former coach, Pat Riley. So I think that certainly plays into it.
And Pat Riley and Danny Ainge, they have a great relationship.
I think
it's not just you, by the way, that has that confidence in the Heat's front office. It was, again, talking to people in Vegas this past week. Everybody's like, I don't see how the Heat get it done, but it's Pat Riley. It's the Miami Heat. They always find a way. That's not just you and me on a Locked On Heat podcast. That is everybody in the league kind of feels that way. Everybody's like, we don't know, but it kind of feels like he might. And this is the way things get done. Let's end the show on this. If the Heat get one of Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell, who do you think? I'm giving you $1 to bet via BetOnline. Who would you bet that dollar on that they're getting between the two? They get one of them for sure. Is it Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell?
Right now, a week ago I said Donovan, and right now I'm thinking more KD. I just think that the other teams, the way things have shifted with Ayton and Toronto and other suitors, I think now Miami's engagement for KD is more likely, and it makes sense, which is why they haven't pursued either PJ Tucker as hotly or any other power forwards, because, well, they've already got their power forward. He's just wearing a Nets jersey right now.
I agree with you.
I can't believe we're talking about this, but yeah, here we are. And if you want to be part of Miami's new Big Four moving forward, because I'm not even sure how to call this version of the team, if they're able to somehow keep Kyle Lowry and keep Kevin Durant on the roster, that would be, well, perhaps the most talented team that Miami has ever had. And that's saying something. But thanks for making the Locked On Heat your first listen every day, especially with all the news coming up. You want to make sure to subscribe to the show. Now make your second listen to get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.